as we're due to start in about a minute or two. Thank you. Where's George? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tony Page, the Mayor of Reading. I've got the privilege of chairing the proceedings this evening. Could I, at the start, invite George Matthews on behalf of the Alliance for Cohesion and Racial Equality just to say a few brief words. Yeah. George, if you want, yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Unfortunately, ACRE's chair, Dr. Ijaz Ilahi, is unable to be with us today. He's got a terrible cold and flu, crazy weather, I know. And so he sends his sincere apologies. And he was really looking forward to this meeting, and he hoped everybody here benefits from the event today. And so I'll be presenting a brief of his opening remarks. My name is George Matthew. I'm ACRE's hate crime lead, and I'm also the Equality and Diversity Officer. So on behalf of the Alliance for Cohesion and Racial Equality, I want to welcome you all to this evening of remembrance and reflection, which we have held every year since 2007 to pay homage to the victims of the Holocaust and genocides. ACRE as an organization is charged with promoting equality and community cohesion in Reading. And this program has always been highlighted as an example of the impact of extreme racial and religious hatred. Today, the HMD Planning Committee has again put together a program of songs, speeches, and prayers that will further increase our knowledge of the true cost of the Holocaust, as well as what lessons we can learn from them. As you can see, provision has been made for refreshments and networking at the end of the formal program that will enable us to talk to each other and get to know each other. So thank you all for making the time and effort to come. And I will now hand over back to the chair of tonight's program, His Worshipful, the Mayor of Reading, Councillor Tony Page. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, George, and can I associate myself entirely with those remarks, and I won't repeat what's been said, other than to thank all of you in this room for the work that you do to promote cohesion and our activities locally. No one organisation in Reading or any town and city can do all the work that is so important to promoting the good relations that we by and large have in Reading. They've been worked out over many years. The council has played an active role, but the churches and faith communities, voluntary organisations, and a large number of others have also played their part, and we're all very grateful for that work. I don't intend saying any more other than just reading a few sentences from a letter that appeared in The Guardian from three politicians nationally, which I think encapsulate the spirit of Holocaust Memorial Day, and this year's theme on the fragility of freedoms will be picked up by our speakers. But the letter from Saeed Awasi on behalf of the Conservatives, and Naz Shah, Labour MP, and Layla Moran, the Lib Dem MP just down the road in Oxfordshire, said that as politicians from three different parties, we come together to remind our country that the rising tide of hatred we have seen in recent months makes it more important than ever that we take this moment on the 27th of January to remember the inevitable outcome of indulging hatred and staying silent when others are persecuted for who they are. And I think we would all say amen to those sentiments. So I shall say no more and ask Andrew Try, the Lord Lieutenant of Berkshire, to start the proceedings this evening with some reflections. Thank you.
What's the Maidenhead angle? So says the editor of the Maidenhead Advertiser to Anthony Hopkins in the current film, One Life. Until I watched the film last night at the very comfortable Everyman Cinema in Egham, I was thinking the same uncomfortable thing. What's the Berkshire angle? What's the Berkshire angle I can speak to for the Memorial Day we are gathered to commemorate this evening? The answer to both questions are, of course, the same. Sir Nicholas Winton, the man whose single-minded determination enabled 669 children to be evacuated from Czechoslovakia in 1939, has another man's single-minded determination set out to destroy them, their parents, and the very existence of their race. That Nicholas Winton came from Maidenhead, from Berkshire, is really irrelevant. But it did encourage me to visit the park that is dedicated to his life this morning. And for the second time in the last 24 hours, I wept. I wept at the movie's depiction of the children being parted from their parents on the station platform. I wept as the soldiers stopped the last train and 250 children lost their futures. I wept as one of the saved described the fate of the brother and parent who were left behind. And I wept as I contemplated those scenes and read the words written on a plaque under a meandering hellebore that says, "It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not, you can still believe in the fundamental ethics of goodness, kindness, love, honor, and help for other people." Winton's words. The physical connection to the ones that endured that terror dwindle, but the echo of the dreadful silence of those who were lost and their generations yet to come must continue by our speaking of them and our remembrance of them. One man indulged the want to destroy, and one man the determination to enable salvation. Today, it is no difference. The want to destroy perpetuates, but so does the determination to enable salvation. As individuals, human rights are the respects afforded by those who care and are swept away by those who don't. The key is to care, to love. Nicholas Winton cared when things looked desperate for others across the sea and their future looked bleak. It was a proactive and caring protagonist that made the difference. What I was left with after my walk this morning were these words of Winton's. Active goodness is the giving of our time and energy in the alleviation of pain and suffering, rather than in the passive goodness of merely doing no wrong. Deeds may be great or small, but active goodness ripples across our communities, across our county, across our world, and down to the generations yet to come. As Nicholas Winton said, save one life, save the world. Thank you.
And if I could now ask Olivia Graham, the Bishop of Reading.
My dear friends, our world is in a fragile, fragile state. Every day when we turn on the news, we hear about wars and rumors of wars. We hear about the insidious spread of conflict across regions of our world. We hear about the escalation of violence. We hear about the damage done to human lives and livelihoods by aggression, ambition, greed, disrespect of human rights, and misuse of power. And we weep as death tolls rise and more innocent lives are wiped out with all the potential they contained. And here in our country, we are deeply affected as division and hostility elsewhere, especially when based on ethnicity or religion, affects our own communities. So it is really important to focus each year on the defining genocide of the 20th century, the Holocaust. And it's really important to focus in on the suffering of a people and to become aware of the power of evil, which is always present in our world, that led to the deaths of 6 million Jewish people and the deaths of many others who were killed because they didn't fit with a distorted vision of purity and perfection. It's really important to remind ourselves what happens when evil is not confronted, when demagogues are not challenged, when perverse ideas of national identity are promulgated with high rhetoric, and when whole populations are manipulated and do not recognize it. Our freedoms are fragile. We cannot take them for granted. We meet each year on Remembrance Sunday to salute the courage of those who have stood up, spoken out, and fought and died for them. And on this Holocaust Memorial Day, as we think of this deepest of abuses of all, that it is to be human, we remind ourselves of the need for courage. Complacency is the subtle, insidious enemy of freedom. We go along with the bad things which are perpetuated in our world because it is easier, it's more comfortable, it is less disruptive than standing out against them. So we remember those whose lives were taken from them. We remember those who suffered unspeakable brutality and callousness. We remember those who survived but whose lives were marked forever by a huge, inarticulate grief for all that they had lost, or by the trauma which stayed with them forever. We remember those whose acts of courage stood out and often cost them dearly. And we recognize that humanity is still scarred by the belief that race, religion, disability, or sexuality makes some people's lives worth less than other people's. Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination still continue. And we have a shared responsibility to fight these evils. There have been genocides since the Holocaust. It's not over. It's never over. And nor must our determination ever fail. We must speak the truth. We must witness to what we see and know. We must act with integrity. We must stand in solidarity, and we must live with courage. If we forget, we increase our peril and the peril that the world is in. Our freedoms are fragile. We hear again the call, through the stories shared of the Holocaust experience, to guard with great vigilance what we have, all that we hold dear. Today, as increasing levels of polarization and violence continue to impact our world, we urge that all people will learn lessons from the past and take steps to challenge hatred and persecution. And I know that we pledge together here in this room to demonstrate our unity and our commitment to stand against evil and to say that it must not prevail in our world.
We will now proceed to the candle lighting ceremony, and if the Lord Lieutenant would like to lead the way. The order is on the list. Olivia, you're off. And Simon and Helen. Then your good self. I think you better do two, Brendan. Right, George should do two then. now we'll hear from the choir.
Good evening, everybody. Our first song this evening. Give peaceful rest for the soul of the departed, protected by the divine presence. Ben is going to sing that as a solo, but following that we will sing Shalom Aleichem. That is an ancient greeting meaning peace be unto you. It first appeared in the Jerusalem Talmud in 400 of the Common Era, and it was set to the tune we will sing in the 19th century. Boachem l'shalom, Malachei hashalom, Malachei elyon. Come in peace, messengers of peace, messengers of the Most High. And it's usually sung, traditionally in Jewish homes, on Friday nights. Ben.
And if I could call on the Rabbi Jonathan Romain to...
First of all, a short extract from the service for the 6 million. We remember the 6 million who died when violence ruled the world and evil dwelt on earth. We remember those we knew and those whose very name is lost. We mourn for all that died with them, their goodness and their wisdom, which could have saved the world and healed so many wounds. We mourn for the genius and the wit that died, the learning and the laughter that were lost. The world has become a poorer place, and our hearts become cold as we think of the splendor that might have been. May such times never come again. In our daily fight against cruelty and prejudice, tyranny and persecution, their memory gives us strength and leads us on. And before finishing with the memorial prayer, the Kaddish, I think it's only right to say that this is probably a particularly difficult Holocaust Memorial Day, because whilst we here are obviously remembering the past, the victims of the past, primarily Jewish, but so many others as well, we're speaking whilst there is a massive conflict going on right now in Israel, Gaza, at this very moment, and so many other victims. And although it's very different circumstances, and although it's very different causes, it still involves suffering and death. And it means that there's an additional sadness to today's ceremony. And as Bishop Olivia has alluded to, there are so many other trouble spots in the world. And although we've said ever since 1945, never again, we haven't actually reached that point yet. So there's still much work to do. So I'm going to conclude now with the Kaddish, the memorial prayer, for all those who have died, and perhaps I could ask you to stand for that. It's in Hebrew, of course, and for those who know it, I know many won't, but for those who know it, you're welcome to join in. For all who have died. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach yirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agalav b'zman kariv v'yimru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach le'elam malmei almaya. Yitbarach v'ishtabach v'itpuah v'itramand v'yitnaseh, v'yitada v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei d'kudisha, v'rechu. Liela minkol birchata v'shirata, tishbachata v'nechamata, diamiram v'elma v'yimru amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'el kol Yisrael, v'yimru amen. Osei shalom b'mromav, huya asei shalom, aleinu v'el kol Yisrael, v'yimru amen. Please be seated.
It now gives me a great pleasure to welcome Simon Grimberg and Helen Compton and invite them to share some thoughts with us.
Our mother, Anneke, was born in the city of Rotterdam in Holland in November 1938 and passed away, aged 79, in Gerrards Cross in March 2018. She was the first child of her parents, Kurt and Henrietta. Our grandfather, Kurt Schwabacher, was originally from Stuttgart in Germany, but had moved to Holland as a young man in 1931 because of a good job opportunity. Kurt and Henrietta were both keen tennis players and met at their local tennis club. They enjoyed the Dutch way of life as well as being proud of their Jewish heritage. However, this happy, secure life came to an end in May 1940 when Germany invaded Holland, and soon after, German bombs began to fall on the port city of Rotterdam, where they were living. The Dutch surrendered to the Germans, and our mother, with her parents and also her maternal grandparents, moved away from the bombed city of Rotterdam to live in what they thought would be the safer city of The Hague. The Nazis were soon controlling day-to-day events in Holland, which meant that restrictions started to be imposed on Jews. It became increasingly difficult for our grandfather to work as Jewish businesses were confiscated, money was seized, and then eventually Jews had to surrender all their valuables. Finally, in September 1941, Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to the Dutch state schools, and in October of that year, Jews were no longer allowed to work at all. During this time, various other rulings were issued, such as all radios by Jews had to be handed in, although many were kept hidden, and also Jews were banned from riding bicycles, which for a Dutch person was unthinkable. The wearing of the yellow star on their clothes was introduced in May 1942, by which time they were financially broken and their total isolation was complete. Kurt's mother, Anna, who was German, but who was living with them by this time, was thought to be in particular danger as German Jews were initially targeted for deportation above Dutch Jews. So she left Rotterdam to go into hiding with a Dutch Jewish family in Nijmegen. She was eventually discovered, arrested, and sent first to Theresienstadt and then Auschwitz, where she died in the gas chambers. She was 54 years old. Kurt's father, Louis, had remained in Germany, was deported to Chelmno extermination camp in Poland, where he died aged 64. Eventually, our mother's family, which now included her maternal grandparents, Simon and Serafina Vandenberg, and her aunt Elsie, moved to the east of the country to stay on a farm, hidden away in isolation, hoping to survive. Some of their friends of theirs who weren't Jewish offered to look after and hide our mother for the rest of the war, but our grandparents decided that it would be better to stay together as a family. Such a decision must have been incredibly hard. Their friends did look after some of their possessions during the war, a few of which we have now in our homes and treasure enormously. Finally, the day came, 21st of April 1943, when our mother, her parents, her mother's parents, and her Aunt Elsie were rounded up and sent to Vught transit camp in Holland, rather than Westerbork, as at the time Westerbork was full. They spent 3 months in Vught, during which time our grandfather was used as slave labor to build German fortifications. The conditions were terrible, and there were a number of ferocious biting dogs let loose on the Jewish inmates, which led our mother to have a lifelong fear of dogs. On the 2nd of July 1943, approximately 1,600 Jews, including our mother's family, were transported by train from Vught to Westerbork camp in a desolate northeastern region of Holland. This was another holding camp before deportation further east. Our grandmother got polio in Westerbork. One of the most stressful times during their stay in this camp was a Monday night, when the lists were put up for the weekly Tuesday transportation to the east. After 7 months in Westerbork, their time was up in that camp, and on the 15th of February 1944, they were transported not to Auschwitz, but via a 3-day train journey to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany, where they were held as potential exchange Jews.
By now, our mother was 5. The living conditions in Belsen were very difficult, with huge lice, typhus, dysentery, and malnutrition. Our mother had an overriding memory of turnips being the staple food. We never had them in the house when we were children, and to this day, we have never been able to knowingly eat a turnip. For her 6th birthday, our mother had a very strong memory of her grandfather giving her a piece of bread with a tiny portion of jam. This meant an enormous amount to her and was a story she often told on her subsequent birthdays. Her grandfather, Simon, died in March 1945 in Belsen of typhus and malnutrition, lying in a bunk next to our mother. He was 57 years old. By the spring of 1945, our mother and her parents also had typhus. During April 1945, the British Army were advancing on Belsen and liberation was in sight. But it was at that point that the Nazis decided to put some of the remaining exchange Jews on a train to Theresienstadt in the Czech lands to hold as hostage and hope that they would be a bargaining tool. The transport of the Jews was arranged in 3 train loads, with my mother's family being on the 3rd train. There were approximately 2,400 people on this train, all of whom had typhus. 195 people died on the 2-week train journey. Some of the memories that have been written about this journey include that the trucks were like human sewers with no washing or toilet facilities and no food. The journey ended near a village called Trobitz in eastern Germany after the Nazi guards had abandoned the train in order to escape from the advancing Russian army. For several days, the train just stood there, and we were told that our grandfather joined a group of other young men who went out looking for food, and that he had stolen bread to give to his family. While the family were hiding in a ditch, they were finally rescued by Russian soldiers on horseback, who threw them some bread and kept a clear distance as they didn't want to catch typhus. It was at this point that our mother's maternal grandmother, Serafina, died very shortly after liberation, aged 50. The surviving Jews from the liberated train were eventually assisted back to Holland by American troops, where they were taken to the reception centre at the Philips factory in Eindhoven, where they received food and treatment, including having their heads shaved to remove the lice. There, they lay on straw mattresses on the floor, with loudspeakers and sirens being used to dictate their daily routines. One of our grandmother's brothers, our great-uncle Herman, had not been living in Holland when war broke out, so had been able to join the Free Dutch Forces, a brigade that was part of the British Army. He landed in Normandy shortly after D-Day, visiting Belsen after it had been liberated, in a fruitless search for his family. At last, in June 1945, he was finally reunited with those of his family left alive at the Philips factory in Eindhoven back in Holland, but tragically, both his parents were dead. Our great-uncle Herman told us how he never forgot the beaming smile our mother gave him when he came to take them home. A year later, in 1946, happiness came to our grandparents with the arrival of a second daughter, Judith. In 1960, our mother, Annika, married our father, Andrew Grinberg, and settled in England. Our father gave our mother so much love, support, and care. Through this, she was at long last able to enjoy a stable, safe, and secure home, and despite the inevitable post-traumatic stress resulting from her childhood experiences, was able to be a loving and caring mother to us both, as well as a loving and caring grandmother to Thomas and Anna. On Holocaust Memorial Day, 27th of January 2005, as part of a group of Bergen-Belsen survivors, our mother was invited to meet the late Queen at St. James's Palace. This event, with the recognition it gave her, changed our mother from being a victim of the Holocaust to becoming an honoured survivor.
Thank you very much, Simon and Helen. Could I now ask Brendan Cox to share some thoughts? And could I just say at this stage, as we will have a bit of time, if there are any questions to the speakers afterwards, I'm sure they'd be happy to take them. So we'll take a few after Brendan's remarks. Brendan.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you, Simon and Helen. It's very painful to share those memories for you, and it's very painful for us to listen to them. But it's those stories that make people connect the numbers with the human suffering, and so thank you for sharing that with us today. Thanks also to the organisers for arranging this, because events like this matter. They matter because they remind us of one of the worst moments in human history, but also because they bring us together. And that's even more important, as we've heard, at moments like this, when our communities are often divided, when conflict overseas can turn people against each other, when things that shouldn't be controversial become controversial. So thank you to the organisers for organising this, and for everybody for coming. I'm going to talk about two things briefly this evening. Firstly, my own experience of working with survivors of different genocides, and secondly, what we can all do to prevent the risk of future genocides. I've spent the last 25 years or so working to try to address the threats of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And for me, to your point earlier, the Reading link, it started rather unconventionally in a scout hut in Caversham. So I was a Sea Scout at the time, a very strange uniform, and our scout leader was organising a visit to Croatia and Bosnia. That was just as the war there was coming to an end, and it was a slightly strange place to be going at that time. My parents probably thought it was very odd indeed, but I didn't really think about it. I signed up to go. I think I was about 16, 17 at the time, and that trip affected what I did, what I've done ever since. It is not that we did anything particularly spectacular. We weren't in danger. We simply ran a summer camp for kids who were fresh out of the war zone in Sarajevo. Our work was simply to give them a break from the horror of the last few years. But in those weeks, over that summer, we saw the impact that evil could have on kids of our ages and younger. Kids who had spent months in basements or scurrying between alleyways to avoid snipers, kids who had lost their parents in the war, kids who were targeted simply for who they were. And they were delighted to be out of there. They were delighted to be away from the front line. I noticed they'd happily throw a frisbee for hours after hours, simply because that kind of pointless fun had never been a part of their childhood before. Now, that summer had a huge impact on me, and when I returned, I decided to keep that work going, and every year for the next 10 years or so, every summer and every Christmas, I'd go back to Bosnia and work with different groups of children, but most particularly with children who had survived the genocide at Srebrenica. Now, those were kids, in many cases, who had been orphaned by the war, orphaned in that genocide. Some had survived it, some had been present when it took place, some had to survive in the forest for days after while they were hunted like animals. I remember a kid who I worked with called Amir. He was massively into football, Amir, and every day he'd come up and ask me about Manchester United. I know nothing about football. He was the most disappointed child as a result of that. But each evening he'd go to bed and he would scream because he was scared of the nightmares that would come. And then he'd fall asleep. And then a few hours later, you'd hear the screams all over again when they did. At that time, I was just a teenager, but the horror of it stuck with me, the injustice of it, the acquiescence of the international community who let it happen. And so for the next period of my life, I worked not just in Bosnia, but around the world, trying to help address the threat of war crimes and genocide. I ran a genocide prevention organisation called Crisis Action. I worked with big organisations like Oxfam, Save the Children, the UN. I ended up working in Downing Street on conflict prevention for the Prime Minister at the time. But what all of that taught me was what Hannah Arendt first described as the banality of evil. In all the places I worked, in Darfur, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, the people who did so much of the killing, who carried out the genocide, they weren't uniquely evil people. They were normal people. In some cases, they were good friends of people. They were family members. They might have been good parents. And they're certainly no worse than people that we all know. So what happened was that a culture was built, propagated, and then enforced that justified violence, that marginalized minorities, and that dehumanized particular groups. And if they combine that with a sense of threat, of cultural and economic insecurity and groupthink, those ordinary people became capable of extraordinary evil. And so why does this matter other than a history lesson? Well, it matters because it tells us what we must do and also what we mustn't do. We can't just try and spot the evil people and try to deal with them. We can't imagine that our society isn't capable of falling to such extremes, because it is. Instead, we have to build a culture and a country that continually protects us against these risks. And that's why the theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day, the fragility of freedom, is so important. I first started to worry about what was happening in this country around 2014. I'd worked internationally ever since first going to Bosnia, but something started to worry me about the public debate in this country. That grew in 2015 into 2016, and signs that I'd seen in other countries started to show up more regularly in the UK, dehumanizing language, political polarization, the willingness to call people traitors or enemies of the people, the willingness to dismiss the other side as racist or stupid simply because they disagreed with us. Now, I wasn't predicting imminent civil war, far from it, but I did start to refocus my own work on efforts to bridge divides within the UK. My wife and I did a lot of our thinking together. Jo, who I'd met at Oxfam and with whom I'd worked on the Darfur crisis, had become an MP, and she too was worried about the direction that we were heading in. She was doing her best to try to work across divides and tackle political extremism, and of course her work was cut short when she was killed by a far-right extremist in 2016. Now, her killing, as well as destroying our family, was more evidence of the fragility of our own democracy. And that, for me, is the lesson that we have to learn this Holocaust Memorial Day. That democracy and the rights that underpin it, and that it underpins, are not a state that you obtain and enjoy. They're a process that you have to uphold and fight for. I think many of us instinctively felt that Fukuyama was right when he talked about the end of history, not in the literal sense that history had finished, but that liberal democracy was the destination to which human society had arrived. But it's not. In recent years, we've seen liberal democracies fall. Many others are threatened. We've had a renewed era of military coups across the Sahel. The far right are on the march in France, in Italy, in Germany, in Hungary, and of course in the US. In the UK, in the last few weeks, we've seen a 5-fold increase in anti-Semitic attacks and a 7-fold increase in Islamophobic attacks. Now, those have been portrayed and talked about often as a response to the awful conflict in Gaza and Israel. But you don't just go out and attack a Jew or a Muslim because of a conflict overseas unless you already harbour dangerous prejudices. And for me, again, that's why Holocaust Memorial Day is important, because it reminds us that never again means not a wish, it's not a memory, it's not a tribute, it's an ongoing act of defiance in the face of evil, and that it requires something from each of us, for each of us to play our part. When we hear the history of the Holocaust and the testimony that we've just heard today, many of us ask ourselves, what would we have done in that situation, if we were mandated to be a concentration camp guard, would we have had the bravery to refuse, to act, to rebel? But I'm not really sure that that's the right question, or even that asking those very hypothetical questions is the right approach. I think better questions are, when you hear your friends discriminate or dehumanize a minority group, do you challenge them? Or do you keep quiet to avoid making a scene? Do you go out of your way to reach out to communities that are marginalized and discriminated against? Or do you assume that's someone else's job? Do you bolster our democracy by taking part in it, or undermine it by promoting generic cynicism? Now, those are all, I think, more useful questions to ask, because they're all something that we can all do better on. And it's these acts that create a strong liberal democratic culture. And luckily, at this moment in this country, we don't need heroes who are willing to die to stand up against fascism. You don't even have to go on a protest. What we do need is people who are willing to make an effort with groups they might feel uncomfortable with, to risk some social awkwardness by challenging friends or family members when they step out of line, to be willing to make an effort to improve our democracy rather than simply decrying it. It's those small everyday acts that will build our resilience in the face of a threat that will never fully go away. And as Anne Frank said in her diary, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. For me, that's the lesson of this Holocaust Memorial Day, that never again is something we work for, not something we wish for. Thank you.
Right, we have some time for questions, if anybody has any questions to our speakers this evening. Does anybody wish to, gentleman here at the front? No, I've seen you at the back. Yeah, gentleman here at the front.
First of all, I'd like to thank Jonathan Romain to inform me for the function. My name is Nadruddin from Slough. I run an organization who work for multi-faith, and last 2 years organized Holocaust Memorial Day, where I had my guests Jonathan Romain and Lord Carlyle. I just bring you as a Muslim my sympathy to all of you. I'm here to say your pain is our pain. When you suffer, we suffer. Whatever happened on Holocaust Day, we all pray. I request all of you pray it never happen again. Regardless where you come from, what is your faith, what is your color, what is your culture, what is your sex, what is your creed. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me 1 minute to speak.
Gentleman at the back.
Good evening.
Do you want to introduce yourself as well, please?
My name's John, Mr. Cox, the Greenberg family. Thank you for coming tonight to honour the memory of your late wife, sir, and to continue to honour the sacrifices and the duties and what she did and what she gave us, and to yourself as well. Every year we're 1 year further from the Holocaust, and my parents were Holocaust survivors, and they were profoundly damaged people. But they came to this country, and this country gave them freedom. This country gave them everything. And I served in the army in this country to uphold those freedoms. And it's heartening to listen to you, sir, to say that we've got to stand up for those freedoms and stand up for what is right. But there's a fourth wall which faces us today. The fourth wall of media. It doesn't matter what colour the media is, if it's red or white or blue or yellow. And that media is encroaching on young people. And I look around me tonight, there are no young people. And those people are subjected to the media that breaks into their freedom of thought, their ability to critically think. And that media is driven by science. And this behaviour, the behaviours are driven by dogma. And it was 50 years ago that Jacob Bronowski spoke about the arrogance of men who can dehumanise other people, regardless of race, creed, colour, contour of the bones and the colour of your skin. And this dogma in the media is threatening our freedoms. And we have to break that fourth wall, and we have to critically think, and we shouldn't go out and do things which encroach upon others' freedoms, because there's a defined line between doing dumb things, misbehaving, and the loss of your wife, and the murder of David Amos, and other people who have suffered. But thank you very much for sharing that, and I wish you a long life, sir. Thank you.
Brendan, would you, and then I'll ask Helen and Simon if they want to make some comments. Oops, sorry. Brendan.
Yes. I mean, I entirely agree with the challenge of media. I mean, the challenge isn't entirely new in that, again, in the run-up to the Holocaust, the way that virulent anti-Semitism was promoted was through traditional media. And in the genocide in Rwanda, it was the radio. In Srebrenica, it was the radio and local TV. So that the media's ability to tell stories of disconnection and to dehumanize minorities has always been there. I think that the change in the threat is obviously what social media does. And I think to some extent when social media first came onto the scene, there was a lot of optimism that what this might do is enable us to hear each other's stories, for little people who might not be able to get into the newspapers to tell their own story, for us to be able to empathise with each other. But what has happened is that we've built algorithms that take the most extreme content and promote it. So what you're seeing, and you all know this, but what you're seeing when you're on your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed or your Twitter feed, whatever it is the most extreme content. You hear the most polarising voices. And what that means is it acts as an accelerant to polarisation. I think that is something that should worry us. And part of the solution to that, I think, is a statutory one for how do you regulate. You know, this is a wild west at the moment in terms of social media. We wouldn't accept that when it came to our broadcasters, for example, so why do we accept it when it comes to our social media? But it's also about our own behaviour on social media. And again, as I was talking about, there's all things we can do. We all have our best selves and our worst selves on social media. And trying to operate in a way that engages in debates rather than attacks the individual, that tries to see, even in a limited number of characters, nuance, and tries to empathise with where people might be coming from. We can all do better at that, but I think it's both and. I think it can't just be left with an individual. There needs to be a statutory regulatory response to it as well.
Jonathan?
Yes, Brendan's addressed the first part of your question about social media. Your other point was about children, and yes, there's an absence. But that's why I think it's so important that we support not only Holocaust Memorial Day, but Anne Frank Day in schools, because it is, you know, let's be honest, it's very hard to identify with the figure of 6 million. It's just so amorphous, it's so enormous, it's so impossible to comprehend. But you can identify with one individual, you know, particularly of her age, and the transition she was going through, and the hopes and the fears and the loves and the worries, and the life that was so pointlessly cut short. So that's, I think, a very poignant and powerful image and story that we should promote and help promote in schools. So anybody here who's a parent or grandparent or governor or whatever, do encourage your local schools, particularly in Berkshire, to use Anne Frank Day, which commemorates the Holocaust but also takes in subsequent genocides.
Thank you. Helen or Simon, do you want to, it's not obligatory, do you want to add anything?
I mean, the only thing I would agree and stress is the terrible sort of plague of Holocaust denial, particularly on social media, and to be so aware of it, and to try and always to counter untruths with facts and truth, and to try wherever possible, to kind of just bring real testimony and factual information to stop it spreading.
Yeah, thank you. Nick Harborne at the back. Do you want to introduce yourself, Nick?
Hi, my name is Nick Harborne. I'm the CEO at Refugee Support Group. I've spoken at this event several times myself, and I'm here to represent Refugee Support Group as we stand by the Holocaust Memorial Day, that one day in the future we will have no genocide. We have issued a statement on the current conflict going on in the Middle East. If you'd like to read that statement, it's on our website, which is refugeesupportgroup.org.uk. I'm going to read 2 lines, if I might, from the statement. Refugee Support Group urges all world leaders to commit to peace as an unquestionable and irremovable starting point on which to discuss, agree and effect plans that respect and give dignity, safety and a home to all people, and to unconditionally adhere to international law and international humanitarian law. Now, Mayor of Reading Tony Page, Leader of the Council, Jason Brock, Bishop Olivia, you are the closest, I suspect, that I will ever get to a world leader. So if you could pass on our message when you get an opportunity, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'll take a couple of other contributions in the gentleman in the check shirt. Questions on.
Graham Banting, more of a grassroots specialist, but thank all the contributors for their words. And I actually ran the Newbury Holocaust Memorial Day, which is on Friday before the West Parks have retaken it over through the United Nations Association group. So it was good to hear mention the other 4 countries that have been involved in, the speaker mentioned Darfur, and perhaps not forgetting one we had mentioned very much in a previous meeting here, was the Rohingya group in Bangladesh. But my question really perhaps to the second speaker, Brendan, is he's worked in quite a few different organisations, and so how do we set about the role of diplomacy? We remember the South African Reconciliation, I haven't got the full name, you can tell me, group, which followed on Rwanda, and we've got the International Criminal Court, we've got the global coalitions we value very much, and I think soft diplomacy goes about, which you don't always hear about. Very often a neighbour third party, perhaps a bit in Northern Ireland with the USA, the Crimea group there. So we've got the African Union getting a bit more teeth now, and the Arab countries, whatever they call theirs. So that is my question. Be interested in having a word with the Bishop afterwards.
Brendan, do you want to go first?
Yes, happy to. So perhaps just to come back on the on your thoughts and your statement, which isn't a response to it, but one of the things I've been doing in the last few weeks has been working with bereaved Israeli families who lost loved ones on the 7th of October, and bereaved Palestinian families who have lost loved ones in the bombing in Gaza since. And in particular, I'm working with a guy called Magen Inon, whose both his parents were killed in a kibbutz on the 7th of October by Hamas. his parents, amazing people, peace campaigners for a long time, agriculturalists. I've spent a lot of time with him and his family in the recent weeks. And then this equally amazing guy, a guy called Hamza Awad, is actually from the West Bank. His brother was shot by the IDF the week before last. He survived, but seriously injured. And the amazing thing isn't the horror of those stories, because so many people are experiencing that horror at the moment, but the fact that those two people are able to share a stage together, to share a meal together, and to see each other's pain and suffering. And that's the thing that gives me hope in the midst of what feels like an incredibly hopeless situation at the moment, that there are ordinary Palestinians and ordinary Israelis who are able to come together. And one of the most powerful things has been, I've done a few events with them recently where Hamza has talked about Magen's pain and Magen has talked about Hamza's pain. And that ability, if people like that, who are going through the worst experience of their lives, can see each other's humanity and look to a future where they live alongside each other in peace. Doesn't mean that they agree on exactly how you get there or what the next step is, but that, for me, still provides some hope and some, I guess, belief in the human spirit to overcome, even in the midst of this most awful time. And I think then, on the diplomacy question, it feels desperate at the moment, I think, because a lot of the institutions that used to have either soft power or hard power to play those the roles that we might like them to, I think they are either less willing or less able to do that. And that's partly the nature of a multipolar world, where there's all sorts of upsides to that, but it also means that it's harder to find a broker for these individual conflicts who has got the power or the desire to engage in them. And so I do think that while we should hope for good outcomes, from a personal political point of view, I'm desperate that Trump doesn't win the White House next time because of the impact that will have on diplomatic crises around the world. I also think it's about how do we build up our own political institutions in each of our own countries so that if and when we require them in our own country, they are robust enough and powerful enough and well-rooted enough to deal with people that try to overthrow them. So that doesn't answer your question about what the sort of diplomatic solution on all these fronts is, but I think that should be our primary priority, to build up our own institutions, particularly those that protect the rights of minorities, because as soon as they start being chipped away, they might not come for you first, but you will be on the list if you're on any kind of minority group list.
Thank you.
Can I just mention one human right?
Briefly, yes.
This year was the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Thank you. Andrew, did you want to say anything?
My position of Lord Lieutenant, I'm in my third month, and it doesn't come with a job description other than to uphold the dignity of the Crown. But I had the opportunity 3 weeks ago to meet the King, and he asked me how it was going, and I said, well, so far so good, sir. At least, unlike 3 of my predecessors, I haven't been sent to the Tower and had my head cut off, so far so good. But I said to him, there's no job description. What should I be doing? And he had a ponder and thought, and he said, well, interfaith. He said, interfaith, that's what we need to do. We need to ensure that in our communities that we have strong ties across the faith, such that wherever in the world conflict breaks out between peoples, that doesn't spill over into our communities. That's what the boss says. My boss. But I think there's a lot to be said for that. And you know, it's about understanding one another. It's about being respectful of one another. It's about not getting caught up in doctrine, but understanding. I think the sort of area where I'm looking at and trying to encourage is us to understand each other's celebrations. That's a good place to start. You know, because we all like celebrations, so maybe we start there. But that's all I've got to say.
Good. Thank you. Jonathan, anything to add? Olivia?
Well, I suppose...
I daren't touch this. Move that there.
I'm really interested in what has been said, and I think that I just want to, and I would endorse and support all of that. I think what I'd like to add, though, is that I think that as individuals, we always underestimate our power and our influence, and there's a great danger that we leave the peacemaking and the sorting stuff out to that institution or those people over there. And I think there's something in all of this for all of us about taking personal responsibility for being people of peace, people of kindness and love and goodwill, where we are, in all of the relationships we have, in all of the spheres of influence we have. And if we sit down and think about them, they are generally more extensive than we think they are. So I think it's just about an encouragement to all of us to be confident in our own responsibility and ability to be in an influence for good in our world, and never to forget that each one of us is uniquely created, deeply loved by, I believe, our Creator God, and that with that we are called to love each other and to be people of peace to each other. So grassroots upwards, really.
We've got time for a couple more, I think. We'll take the two at the front here, and then Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hi, this is a really good moment for me to introduce myself. I'm Sarah Griffin, and I chair the Reading Interfaith Group. One of the things I find so encouraging about this gathering, which I've been coming to for many years, is that we are all trying to do...
Sarah, why don't you just go up here, but don't take that as a hint to speak too long.
Thank you very much. I'm Sarah Griffin. I'm from the Reading Interfaith Group. I have to say that twice now, don't I? One of the things I find really encouraging about this gathering, and I've been to this gathering every year for quite a long time now, is that we all have many different perspectives, and we are all trying to do roughly the same thing. And I would like us, as a result of this evening, to come away feeling a little bit more empowered to go out into the Reading community, maybe the rest of Berkshire, and make a difference. And this is a fantastic opportunity. We've got some wonderful speakers this evening. They've all got different perspectives. They've all got knowledge that I don't have. So my question is, what works? And what would you like us to do? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'll try and speak more loudly because I only have a sentence, which is just to pick up what Olivia said.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Jill Lake. I'm just a person around. Lots of friends here as well. But just to pick up the one thing that Olivia said that resonated with me, with someone who talked about young people as well, is that she was talking about how individuals have influence. And I thought, what's the most influence that you could give? What's the most powerful influence you can do? And I think of all the people who have children here, all the people who have grandchildren here, you can influence your children
towards this, and they will grow up so that there won't be, there won't be this kind of second generation memory of the Holocaust, but in years to come, and yet there will be all the children of people of goodwill will have grown up feeling that it's quite normal to like everybody, to see no difference that makes a big chasm between us. It will be quite normal, and therefore it won't be anything other than what we expect to do every day of our lives. And if we can go and help a few other people do it somewhere else as well, then that's a plus. But as long as we can do it for our young families and get their children to feel the same, and generation after generation, you see this sort of big vista going forward, I think I feel quite positive then. And with all the unpleasantness with the Trumpism and all the rest of it going on, I feel we need some positivism, and I see it in the children that are to come.
Right, well, let's have some final comments from our speakers. Helen Simon, do you want to go first? I think that cues you in nicely. Those are the last remarks from Jill.
We felt very honoured and privileged to share the experiences of our late mother with you all, and yeah, obviously we hope it will never happen again to any people, any children, and they do suffer. We truly want children not to suffer.
No, Olivia? Sorry.
I think I just want to throw out a question for all of us. Is what am I going to do as a result of this evening?
Andrew?
I just want to say thank you very much indeed. This has been a fantastic evening. And again, I would suggest you do take some time to do what I did this morning, which is go around the Nicholas Winton Memorial Garden, because around it is the quotes around a single individual making a difference, of not being passive in your goodness, but being active in your goodness, making a difference. It's looking a bit drab this morning, I must say, but it's full of hope, the garden, because spring's around the corner. So that's
Thank you, Andrew. Brendan?
Thank you for hosting us. To come back on the what works question, let's obviously go on about that for quite a long time. But the overwhelming, strongest evidence that we have in social sciences about what combats dehumanisation and prejudice is contact, and it is knowing people from different groups. And the more that you can do that on the basis of equity, the harder it is. It's very easy to hate people as a group hypothetically. It's very hard to do that when you know them, when you engage with them on a daily basis. And so that, whenever we think about this in terms of how it plays out in a UK context, is what can we do to improve the contact that we have between different groups in our society. And so to that, my answer on the Bishop's question for me is, how can I better connect my kids, to Jill's point, but also myself, to people in the community that I live who are different than me and that I might not find as easy to talk to from the beginning.
And just to end with the theme of interfaith, which has come up, and by interfaith I would include humanists and all people of goodwill. When October the 7th happened, I got together with the Imam of the Maidenhead Mosque and also the Vicar of St. Luke's, and we each said a prayer for peace. It didn't change the world, but it was a clear message to our respective congregations that whatever is going on elsewhere in the world, we did not have to import it here. And I think this is a key message that we've all shared, that we here can control what happens, and also we have to work very hard to make sure that the conflicts elsewhere stay there and that we can have a different future.
Good. Well, if I could thank all the panel for their contributions, and we'll now move on and hear again from the choir.
We're going to sing a song called Los Bíblicos, that is Judea's Spanish in this case for nightingales. It's a song, it's a popular folk song, it's a love song, and the anguish of love is supposed to be understood by the nightingales. It's from 15th century Spain, and it's sung in Ladino, which is the Judeo-Spanish language of the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula until their expulsion in 1492. We chose it especially because it was at the time of the Golden Age, when Jewish and Arab musicians played together in the Castilian courts in a highly developed and civilized civilization. And it was known for its diversity, its tolerance, and its artistic and scientific advancement. So, Los Bíblicos.
Los bíblicos cantan con suspiros de amor, mi neshama de mi ventura están en tu poder, mi neshama y mi ventura están en tu poder. Los bíblicos cantan suspiros de amor, mi neshama ventura están en tu poder, mi neshama ventura están en tu poder. Más presto ven paloma, más presto ven conmigo, más presto ven, querida, corre y sálvame. Más presto ven, querida, corre y sálvame.
And now I'd like to ask the leader of Reading Borough Council, Councillor Jason Brock, to say a few words. Jason.
Thank you. I continue to think it's horribly unfair to ask me to come up with the way forward every year, but here we are. And no matter how much I say, this is where we get. So I've approached the exercise in the same way that I ordinarily do, which is to reflect on something around the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day for the year. And freedom and the fragility of freedom is something I could talk about at great length, but I shall try not to. But I think freedom is something we would self-evidently want, and a lack of freedom, or the perception that we lack freedom, is always something that we recoil at. But I think it's important that we shouldn't seek to identify freedom only through reference to its negative, only through reference to lacking it, even though I think we're all quite prone, especially in the political sphere, to doing that. But yet, when we try to articulate a positive vision of what freedom is, we fairly immediately run into difficulties. Freedom is an emotive thing, and it speaks to our identity as individuals possessing free will. But what is it exactly? What does it mean to us? Is it to be distinguished from choice, for example? And I really think that we must surely hope so. lest we were to feel content that having some plethora of choices in the products we buy constitutes some kind of meaningful freedom, or, more problematically, unless we were to feel that all freedom is denied to us when we must exercise an enforced choice. Because if the only certainties in life are taxes and our own mortality, we would never possess freedom at all, at least under this council. And intuitively, we feel freedom is a thing to be pursued as an individual and as a collective endeavour. And the distinction between freedom as an absence of restraint and freedom as positive empowerment is in every single political textbook. But in our day-to-day lives, we all experience and desire both those kinds of freedom. And sometimes they sit awkwardly alongside one another, never quite reconciling. Sometimes we feel that tension between these two different forms of freedom as individuals, but more commonly, I think, we see it in our political discourse, or at least if we go looking for it. And I think that one cause of the fragility of freedom is that we do not often enough spend time thinking about it and discussing it. We would want our taxes to pay for the things that we consider to be preconditions of exercising our freedom. Roads, parks, libraries, the ability to pursue leisure, but also bin collections, healthcare, education, public safety, the things that ensure our collective security. And ideally, we would all recognise as well both our necessary and compassionate duties to others in the provision of services that we might never, or at least hope we might never, need ourselves. But there's never any simple freedom test that we can apply. There's no quick yardstick. It is always a contestable space and a place of debate as to whether we achieve the pursuit of freedom. So unsurprisingly, we can also struggle to motivate ourselves in response to the curtailment of freedom, especially when it relates to people other than ourselves. And this, of course, has been a common precursor to genocide, even if maintaining freedom in its individual political, economic, and legal senses is insufficient alone as a safeguard against genocide. So by now, you'll all quite rightly be wondering where the way forward here is, and questioning how much of your own freedom you should give up listening to me, perhaps. So I should get to it. And we should, I think, slightly provocatively perhaps, recognise that freedom is not inherent. It is not a natural state of affairs for humanity. It is a value and it is a reality conditioned by culture, and it is historically specific. It may stem in some way from our basic desire for safety and security, but it is not synonymous with it, because we want freedom to mean something like our ability to flourish over and above survival. But it is not freedom, in my view, I'm afraid, a truth that we can hold to be always self-evident. But it is a very good value, and it is something that enriches our lives and our society. And part of that rests exactly on the fact that it is a contestable concept, a good way to shape our politics and our society by debating, discussing, agreeing what freedom we wish to pursue. And it exists only because of our near universal agreement that freedom, however thoughtless or however thoughtful we are in divining it, is a good thing. And because of this fact alone, it has an effectively foundational status in our modern society. And a few years ago, I wrote a short piece on how my own party should recapture the language of freedom. And I'm very pleased to say that no one has paid much attention to it since, even if anybody read it at all. But worse still, a great many of our national and international politicians have stopped valuing freedom, and the public discourse around that is, I think, in a very dire state. So my plea, the way forward, is that we must correct this. And if we value freedom, and we do not wish for it to be too fragile, we must engage with the concept. We must debate it, we must demand it, we must articulate our vision of it, because it is too readily hijacked by political extremes otherwise as a nice and powerful word that can be used and has been used to justify even the most heinous of crimes. And I don't mean that we should discuss it in the way that I have today. I've indulged myself because you all have to indulge me. But we need to find a language and an argument that speaks to our societal and human unity rather than definitions that covet our division. And if we do not, I'm afraid that the consequences shall be very dark indeed. Thank you very much.
And now the final song from the choir.
We're going to finish with Ose Shalom, which is a prayer put to song which expresses an ancient prayer expressing a longing for peace. Ose Shalom bimramov, huya ase shalom, aleinu v'il kol Israel ve'imru amen. May the one who creates peace in the heavens bring peace to us, to all of Israel, and our lad to humanity, and we say amen. This will be a familiar tune to many of you. If you would like to join in, please feel free to do so.
Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Yase shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael. Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
I'm now going to give a combined vote of thanks, firstly on behalf of Victor Caroma, from the Chief Executive Officer of ACRE, who many of us have known over many, many years. Victor, I hope is listening. He promised he would. He's unwell, and I think we all obviously send our best wishes, Victor, to you. I'm now going to read the comments that Victor would have delivered at this point, and if you'll bear with me, they are before me. Firstly, he thanks Andrew, Lord Lieutenant, then myself, the Bishop of Reading, Olivia Graham, and ladies and gentlemen, many of whom I and Victor call friends. Victor's often given his reflections before extending thanks, and this is now Victor speaking, but I want to start by apologising to you all for not being at tonight's gathering. For the first time in 17 years, I'm missing Reading HMD Evening of Remembrance and Reflection, all because of health challenges. My daughter cheekily said that my body was preparing itself for the third age. I hope not yet. I have been keeping my friends on the planning committee informed of my condition and seemingly slow recovery process. The Alliance for Cohesion and Racial Equality, ACRE, like its predecessor, the Reading Council for Racial Equality, have always regarded Holocaust Memorial Day as a unique opportunity to honour the memories of the victims of the Holocaust and as an example of the consequences of extreme racial and religious hatred. and this year's commemoration is regarded with equal reverence. Anyone attending previous events would have noted that we also cover contemporary issues, including other genocides and human rights abuses, in keeping with the direction of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. Once in a while, this tends to throw up its challenges, and all of us would attest this is the case even as we meet. However, as Alliance for Cohesion and Racial Equality, charged with promoting equality and community cohesion in Reading, we believe that all have a duty to foster good relations with those we share a common space, regardless of our differences. We also believe that the best way to address our concerns is to sit and have a discussion, now more than ever. There are certain things that are beyond our control, but does not mean we put our relations in Reading down. ACRE and the Planning Committee are therefore thankful to our distinguished guests, Andrew Try, the Mayor, Bishop Olivia, and our keynote speakers, Simon Grinberg, Helen Compton, and Brendan Cox, to Rabbi Romain and the Maidenhead Synagogue Choir, who over the years have played a huge part in making our gatherings very memorable. This year, I'm very grateful, nay, indebted to my colleagues on the Planning Committee who have filled the gap of my absences at crucial stages of the planning process. So, sincere thanks and gratitude to Tom Lake, Mark Drucker, and Lucy Daniels and her of RBC Events Management team, all of whom are here this evening. Many thanks also to the ACRE trustees and staff who have always been on hand to support the work of the organisation. And finally, collective thanks to you, all our guests here tonight, as many of you have supported us year after year. And on behalf of myself as Mayor and Victor, thank you all again for coming, and do please partake of some refreshments afterwards. Thank you very much.